Hi everyone. Today we have with us Wim Vandekerckhove. He is a reader in business ethics at the University of Greenwich. His central areas of interest are whistleblowing and philosophy of management. To know more about his research, please check the links which are mentioned in the video description. As a background for our audience, I thought I'll just share a tiny bit about whistleblowing. So whistleblowing is the disclosure of information related to corrupt, illegal, fraudulent, or hazardous activities being committed in or by public or private sector organizations. These activities are of concern to or threaten the public interest. Wim has worked extensively on various aspects of whistleblowing, including its relation to democratic values, organizational social responsibility, the legal aspects of it. We have also linked some of his works in the description. Okay, to start with, I thought we could talk about whistleblowers in the context of the pandemic situation, especially the case of Li Wenliang. So Li Wenliang was the Chinese ophthalmologist who worked at Wuhan Central Hospital. In December 2019, he had issued emergency warnings to local Wuhan hospitals about a number of mysterious pneumonia cases discovered in the city over the previous week. On 30th December, he received an internal diagnostic report of a suspected severe acute respiratory syndrome, which he shared with his other friends. Now, what the report seems to be saying is that he had requested confidentiality from these friends, but later he was dubbed a whistleblower after the report was publicly circulated. So in this case, there's a very complex relation between socio-political atmosphere, the intention of the doctor, the actual consequences of whistleblowing. So how would you look at this case of whistleblowing? What kind of dimensions surface for you in this case?
Well, it's a very interesting case, a very fascinating case for many reasons. So I think one of the main reasons why I think this is a fascinating case is that it is something, so this person raised the concern about something that really affects us all. And really all of us, and we can really, I mean, whistleblowers in health or in the healthcare sector, they resonate a lot more. They resonate a lot more than whistleblowers in the financial sector. Although it also, whistleblowers, you know, with regard to financial fraud, this also affects us. But very often corruption, bribery, it's seen as a victimless crime. Okay, because it's not immediately visible or attributable. This is different in the healthcare sector. So, for example, in the UK, there's been a lot of whistleblowing cases in the National Health Service. And so this is the most prominent topic maybe of whistleblowing in the UK. It's National Health Service. Why? Because it affects all of us. Yeah, everyone needs doctors, hospitals, or they have parents or children, so they can really easily identify with those that are harmed by the wrongdoing or the malpractice. And I think, you know, the case of the Chinese whistleblower in COVID-related case, I think is also very important. It's almost universal that we can easily relate to that. I think that's one reason why it's a fascinating case. I think the other reason is that this is also a case. It's clear that it is the whistleblowing, as you said. You know, it's first quite confidential, and later was identified as a whistleblower. So this is what typically happens. It's a very protracted process. And one way in which, I mean, scholarship has for a long time approached whistleblowing as a one-off decision, but it's not a one-off decision. It's a really long process, and somewhere along that process, other people identify someone as you're a whistleblower now, or, you know, people who have been raising concerns come to identify and see themselves as whistleblower. But that's not how they started out. It's not, you know, they start as someone who's just pointing out a mistake, or just raising a concern, or just asking a question, and it very quickly becomes clear that, well, that was the wrong question to ask. so in a sense, that although this is it's a very big issue, very big case, if you want, it is perhaps different from Chelsea Manning, perhaps different from Edward Snowden. This is a case that you could say it is much more typical of whistleblowing cases, even the smaller one, because of this clearly protracted process of asking a question, raising a concern locally, internally, but then keeping on doing it because no one is listening, that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. So what you just said sort of reminds me of this other point I have wanted to share and discuss with you. I think Lee would be an internal whistleblower, right? So to tell us the difference between internal and external whistleblowers, could you tell us who are the people who could have been potential external whistleblowers in this case? Like, given that this is a novel coronavirus, so medically people outside the community might not have even known, but where could have been there been more transparency from external whistleblowers? So who could have been external whistleblowers in a professional?
Yeah, the question is, was he an external whistleblower, or did someone take over at some point? I guess those would be the details of the case. I'm still thinking of the the three female whistleblowers that were then Time magazine said they are persons of the year. It's a long time ago, around the turn of the century, and I think for at least two of them it was the same. They were actually internal whistleblowers, and then someone leaked their internal whistleblowing to the press, for example. So at the CERN you get a different dynamic. So and this just comes to show that I'm not such a fan of making the distinction between internal or external. I'm not against it, but you need to be clear that every external whistleblowing is always preceded by an internal whistleblowing. I think that is the important insight, and I also think that is where that's where the attitude change needs to happen. That might be a naive assertion to make, but that is probably where this thing called organization is problematic, because it is too easy for blindness and deafness to occur within this thing called organization.
Okay. I was thinking, like, on a related note, what would be the role of anonymity given the internet era? So today anyone can go and anonymously share reports on various platforms. And in your perspective, what are the positive and negative aspects of this ability to share, especially in a time of crisis like this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think one important thing is that people sometimes overestimate their anonymity. So technically speaking, and these are great systems. So you can have them online or via an app, and you can actually communicate anonymously. And this, I've heard this from organizations who use that. This can facilitate communication. So organizations who really want to get this right can really use it to everyone's advantage, because it is true that for someone to make a report or to raise that concern, even internally, research has shown that the biggest worry is one around confidentiality. And if you can really guarantee that no one will know it is you who raised the concern, for a lot of people, that allows them to actually make the concern, right? And so it is, you can ask a question back, so you can have two-way communication without anyone knowing who is who. So technologically, this is a major step, really good. However, it seems to be a fundamental way that our brains are wired. But when a concern is raised, its fundamental human response seems to be, who said that? Okay, so we know in the UK there's a case of a big bank where the CEO, someone had raised concerns anonymously, or in confidence with the compliance officer about a senior person's appointment. And when the compliance officer approached the board of directors, right, the CEO tried to find out who it was, and the compliance officer said, "I'm not going to say." Okay, so this attempt, who is it? And I was at I can't say who said that, but it was a meeting of a seminar with other compliance officers of a number of companies, and they were saying this is not an exception. Okay, when we approach the board and we say, okay, we've had an internal whistleblower and this is serious, we really need to look at this, we really need to investigate, the first question you always get is, who was it? Right? So it comes down to the courage and the strength of the compliance officer to then say, I'm not going to tell you who it is. Okay, and they were saying, like, sometimes compliance officers are under tremendous pressure to give away the identity. So we do have a problem there, that even with these anonymous systems, people try to find out. They try to find out. Now, if you have a small team and you raise a concern about something that only few people can know about, it's sometimes very easy to guess who the person is. So I do think that, technologically speaking, this two-way anonymous, it's a computer interface. It's a big step forward, but everything still depends on the attitude with which you run these whistleblowing systems. You need to run them with you need to want to listen. Okay, as long as that's not there, whistleblowing is going to go wrong. So very often, people would say, people seem to think that the problem with whistleblowing policies is you need to get more people to raise concerns, more people to blow the whistle. And my point is, like, that's not true. We've got enough whistleblowers. What really needs to change is we need to get the people that they raise concerns with need to listen more and need to act upon whistleblowing more. Right? So I'm not against whistleblowers, but I'm just saying, like, it's not enough people are asking the right questions. Enough people are raising concerns. We need to get organizations much better at listening and acting upon it.
Okay. So that marks the end of the first segment on whistleblowing. So now on to the next segment about philosophy of work and management during the pandemic. So I want to know about some points that you had raised in your recent editorial note in the journal Philosophy of Management. We have linked this note in the description as well. Discussing the prospects of philosophical inquiry into disaster management, you had looked at the work of many people, including Tanguay, Renaud's 2009 paper, Naomi Zack, Melnick and Bernheim, Walzer. In your perspective, what kinds of insights have emerged from the responses of different levels of management to COVID-19?
Yeah, well, I think, but there's a bunch of questions that I think I haven't read answers to yet, but I think I wrote this introduction just because I noticed that in the journal we had published papers on disaster management, and just reading them back, I thought that. And afterwards, I heard from one of the authors that was saying, like, you're absolutely right. If we're now going to write about disaster management, it's very likely we're going to just maybe not come to different positions, but at least come to them, from different reflections or different considerations. And so I think this is really fascinating. Now, I think it's also something that, normal line management will need to look at these things. Okay, so it's not just medics that need to come to a scene where a natural disaster has happened and need to decide on limited resources. It's almost like every organization now needs to do that kind of thinking. And some organizations just seem to be a little bit better prepared. So one of the things I'm going to be, I've got a business class starting in a couple of weeks. One of the things we'll be looking at is how management has responded to that, and what is a better response than another one. And just to give one example, Amazon said to in March to its workers, you know, we're gonna increase wages, and the increase will be until June. Okay. In March, that seemed, with the prognosis we had around the pandemic, everyone thought like it'd be a couple of weeks. So a pay rise until the end of June seems very comfortable. That changed very quickly. And then the kind of thing that, you know, this was a pay raise for workers who were being paid around the minimum wage to start with. Okay, so a pay raise was like, well, you know, it's not really a virtuous thing. You know, it's something that you should have done ages ago. But then to say, oh, and the end of June, we're going to take that back. You can, and you know, you can predict that in March that this is going to go wrong. So Danone, for example, a different company, which I think managed a lot better during the pandemic. They did not say we're going to have a pay increase. They said in March, there's a one-off bonus we're going to give because everyone's going to have a hard time, whatever your situation. So, you know, a black one-off bonus. Now, if you look at behavioral science, the fact that you're going to be taking away a pay increase is really a bad idea. Right? People are not going to like that. A one-off bonus is going to, and this unconsciously, we're going to experience that as a lot more fair. Getting a pay increase for a couple of months, then it's taken back. We're going to experience that as unfair. So I think this is you know, regardless of moral character, I think this was just a stupid thing. It's a stupid management mistake. Okay? So I think that there's going to be a lot of that when you analyze management decisions during the pandemic. You're going to see a lot of like, it's just plain stupid, right? Regardless of the ethical question. But I also think we're going to see we can analyze the ethics of management, or at least the experiences. Now, one of the things we've done during the pandemic, because a lot of our students are working students. So we've asked students to write a short blog of their experiences. And at the moment, I'm going through these and sort of analyzing them a bit around what ethical reasoning is in there. And so it's fascinating. So just to give you one example, there's a blog by one of our students. And what the student did was he actually put himself forward to do some volunteering in hospitals during the pandemic. Okay, and he said this is his right, but he said like I was becoming quite bored with working from home, so he had a part-time job doing some sales. So I was getting bored working from home, so I decided that I would volunteer at the hospital to give something back to the NHS. I felt proud to be doing something that made a difference. There's a whole lot of ethical reasoning in there. Okay, so there's virtue ethics in there, because being bored is not something virtuous persons are, right? Then they're not bored. So instead, he decided to do something active and generous. Okay, volunteering at the hospital. So there's a virtue ethics reasoning in there. There's also, you know, he says, I'm going to volunteer at a hospital to give something back to the NHS, right? And giving something back to society. That's a form of reasoning we come across a lot in CSR. And you could ask, well, why? Do you think you've taken something in the first place? Okay, so you need to give back, because if you wouldn't give back, would it make you feel like you've stolen something? Why? You know, he hasn't stolen anything from a hospital. But it's, you know, it's that kind of, it's a sort of Kantian deontological reasoning. You know, you can't steal, so you need to make sure you always give back. I'm not sure that this is conscious ethical reasoning going on, but it's nevertheless, it's there. But the most fascinating thing is the last part of that quote. I felt proud to be doing something that made a difference. And that's your existentialism. And that's the thing I had in writing that editorial, to the volume of a philosophy of management. And I think, I think this is because of the pandemic, I think we need to reach back to existentialism. And there's a couple of reasons about that. Existentialism talks about courage in the face of absurdity. And that is, a pandemic is something absurd. You cannot predict what is going on. No one could predict the series of events that we've seen and how our time framing is totally changing. And it also means that doing the right thing is not something, it's not a matter of being a hero. Because what you then read, what he is so proud of, is he actually prepared a hot meal for the doctors and nurses who were running really long shifts at the hospital. And that is him making a difference. And you can see that it's genuinely true, right? And he writes about how happy the doctors and nurses were. And I can fully understand you. And it's a small thing, it's cooking a meal for someone. But it's so humanly real that those really are the things that really matters. And it's not like this is a new insight, but I think that the pandemic really reminds us of these fundamental things. And it reminds us in all spheres of life, but I think it also reminds us in the context of managing and what you can do as a manager to actually create good relationships at work. And if you're not going to do those fundamental things, you're going to get it wrong. So it's the small things that really matters. So managing during a pandemic, it's really important to get those things right, because those are moments of that will create or destroy the culture in your organization for years to come. If you get it wrong now, it's going to be a hard time repairing that. And so I think authenticity is important, not in the big plans, not in the big strategies, but in the small things, because the normal ideological routines and rational moral justifications, they don't work anymore because the situation is so absurd. You need to strike a fundamental human level now. And so I think that's going to be, I'm really looking forward to see the analysis of management during the pandemic as to, what really made a difference and what made people experience their managers as fair and just during a pandemic.
I also actually just going to ask you, in the last question was supposed to be about that, about you rereading The Plague and by Camus and what you had felt. So that's pretty much all the questions I wanted to ask. But I thought I would end with a quote from Camus' The Plague, and so I'll just do that for our audience. So,
okay.
But what does it mean, the plague? It's life, that's all. They knew now that if there is one thing that one can always yearn for, and sometimes attain, it is human love. Okay, I kept it very short. I cut down a lot of it in between. But thank you so much, Wim, for doing this. I know you've been it's been tight for you. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful.
And I think, thank you for reaching out and for this conversation. And I must say, I think that's a perfect quote to end. Yeah.
I just found it because I literally, you answered the last question, so I just found some quotes which would fit in with the kind of sensitivity that you think this time requires. So thank you so much, Wim. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.